I'm fine. How are you?
Great.
I see you voted.
Yeah, I did.
Ah.
I thought you'd never notice. Okay, let's get to the business at hand. I'm on chapter 17.
You are in chapter 17 of what?
Of the Iceberg Slim book.
No.
I mean, my book.
Your book.
It's called
Shackles.
Shackles Across Time.
Shackles Across Time.
And that's what it's all going to be.
All right. Looking forward to it.
Yes.
Please.
Okay, as you've been able to determine in your cinematographic journey, things are beginning to become more and more intense. And that will be the case here. So, he's looking at you.
Okay, he's looking at you.
Nice to be able to wet your whistle as you read this stuff.
I do understand.
Otherwise you'd be dry when you finished.
Oh, you don't want to be dry. Maybe a little high, but not dry. Okay.
Chester tilted his head back against the seat of the car. He felt spent, emotionally drained. Ceremony to remove the curse from the descendants of Quartey, the slave trader, had been performed. The ceremony had lasted for hours and involved many prayers, the pouring of libation, and the slaughter of the sheep. He had not been distressed by the killing of the sheep. He had killed animals himself and seen animals killed as an aficionado of the bullfight. This was something else. 3 times during the ceremony, as the throats of the sheep were cut, he heard the voices of Benjamin, Bella, and Tabula.
Oh.
He couldn't recall what they said, but he had heard their voices, all in agony. The hours he had spent in the old man's presence, watching him talk, beg, threaten, negotiate, implore invisible figures, had given him a headache. Maybe the old man is crazy. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe we're all crazy. Emmanuel, drive up that hill at the edge of town. There's something I want to see. Yes, sir. The dawning sun was beginning to cast shadows that would soon disappear as it rose higher. Chester looked out into the valley that he had become familiar with, staring into it from the terrace of Tamara's restaurant hotel. Mr. Simmons, my father, says that it will take a few days to determine if our offerings have been accepted, and he also says that there are other things to be done. A few days. I don't have a few days. I'm supposed to be hustling book sales. A few days, what's that mean? Africa. He folded his hands together and unconsciously nodded his head. I think I should come here to live. Maybe I could understand a lot of things a lot better. Why does every single thing have to have some mysterious element to it? Or is that just my imagination? The sounds of latte awakening caused him to smile. No hammers pounding the earth here. No thundering noises of jets cruising through the air. None of the harsh grinding that signaled the beginning of the day where we come from. A rooster crowed and was instantly answered by a rival. The liquid lilt of a woman singing drifted to his ears. He felt like crying and couldn't locate the motivation for his tears. A few days? What can I do here in Latte for a few days? He strolled slowly back to the car and a concerned expression on the driver's face. Sir, you are not well? I'm okay. Just a little tired, that's all. Take me back to tomorrow. 3 days later, he was summoned to Grandfather Odei's presence. His son sat at his right side, translating his translation to Emmanuel, the driver, who translated to Chester. He felt more at ease with the process than he felt the first time. It was time-consuming, but what was time? So, Grandfather Odei says that you can go into the bush next week. He will help make the preparation for your journey. Chester stared at the sculptured features of the old man's face. He wasn't joking. He was asking Chester L. Simmons, the Okyeame spokesman for the Quartey family, to spend maybe a month in the bush to qualify, validate himself as a spokesman for the family. The son studied the puzzling questioning expression on Chester's face and invited him to speak, to question. He did in a carefully controlled voice. But why? Why am I being asked to do these things? The translations became almost fugal for a few minutes, as though the three translators were having a private conversation. Finally, Emmanuel turned to him and explained, Mr. Simmons, the spirits have asked for this. They have asked Grandfather Odei, who is the one who comes here speaking for the Quarteys. What are his credentials, his qualifications? A wry smile tilted the corners of Chester's mouth. So the spirits need a resume.
Of course.
You know, that's
the fact that I'm here is okay, not enough, okay.
A resume up there, will be all that.
Mm-hmm.
The spirits are asking for direct contact with you. They have not fully accepted your offerings. There are other things that must be done. Chester felt a shiver roll down his spine. There it is again. Other things to be done. What other things other than going to the bush? Please ask him. Once again, surprisingly, the old man spoke directly to him. If you decide to go into the bush to do what is necessary, I will prepare you to receive your instruction from the spirits. And when should I give you my answer to this, to whether or not? You must give me your answer now before you leave this place. The old man's sculptured features were suddenly those of a cruel mask filled with malevolent shadows. The shivers rolled up and down Chester's spine, made him tremble, his teeth chattered. Oh God, I hope it's not malaria. The four men sat in place staring into the embers of a fire. It seemed to Chester that they'd been sitting there for hours. He thought cautiously, fearfully for a few beats, and then with cold logic, if I say no to this, everything will have been in vain. If I say yes, there's at least some possibility of pulling this thing off. He felt he had no choice but to gamble. Grandfather Odei, my answer is yes. The fierce gleam in the old man's eyes softened. A gentle smile played on his mouth. Yes, this is good. The right thing for you to do. When do we start? All of them shared a laugh at his Western anxiety. It will be soon, perhaps Monday or Tuesday. I will have to ask the spirits. The old man then turned to his son and spoke urgently for a few beats. The son translated to Emmanuel. Emmanuel bowed and led Chester out of the old man's hut, smiling. Well, what was that all about? Grandfather says that you must come to live in his compound so that he can prepare you for what needs to be done in the bush. Chester nodded numbly. Damn. Who wants to leave air conditioning and room service and come and live in a mud hut? After an hour of international wrangling, Chester was finally connected to Robert Quinn of Quinn Products and Company, his connection to the Quartey consortium. Chester, how's it going? It took Chester a full beat to think about how to answer such a casual question. It's going well. It's going well. This evening, I'll move out of a nice hotel with a wonderful restaurant, chilled beer, and a gorgeous view to live in a bare-bones compound. And after the grandfather has prepared you, or whatever that means, then what? I can't answer that right now. I have to wait and see. One question I have to ask you before we get disconnected or something. How are the kids, Benjamin, Bella, and Tabula? The pause lasted so long, he thought they'd been disconnected. They're sick, Chester, real sick. All three of them. Something happened with their throat. I got a call from the Johnson the other day about Tabula and about Benjamin from the Quarles. Why do you ask? When did they get sick? Bella, Tabula, Benjamin. Just the other night, we thought Bella was choking to death. The evening the sheep was slaughtered. That's got to be the connection. Those were the voices I heard. What's happening over there? You know something we don't know? Bob, look, it's hard to say. At this point, it's hard to really say anything specific about anything. All I can say on the positive side is that matters seem to be progressing. Suddenly there was a small gargle and Robert Quinn was gone. They were disconnected. Chester replaced the phone in its cradle. There was no need to try to revive communications by petitioning the overseas operator. They had exchanged enough information. It was time for Emmanuel to collect him, to take him to Grandfather Odei's compound, to leave the air conditioning and room service behind. The rooster crowing on the other side of the mud wattle wall woke him, and the sounds of women at work kept him awake. Chester carefully shifted from his side to his back and stared up at the thatched ceiling. There's got to be some snakes up there.
Everybody knows.
Got to be some snakes up there.
Lizards at least.
He felt almost guilty about being in bed, a thin mat draped over a mud platform, so late. Why should I feel guilty? And what time is it anyway? He fumbled through the pockets of his pants draped on a nearby chair. 6:15. 6:15 a.m. in the morning. He pushed the small straw-filled pillow up under his head, laced his hands behind his head and thought. The sounds that were coming to him were so distinct and pure they sounded like beautiful music. The rooster crowing again, the shrill chatter of children, women's mellow voices, the authoritative baritone of Grandfather Odei. This almost seemed like something I've been a part of before. Chester made a slow pan of his bedroom. Plain and simple. Hooks on the wall, a metal wash basin, a chair, a mud platform bed. I go! A verbal knocking on his non-existent door. Come in, he answered. Grandfather Odei eased into the room and stood looking at him for a few beats. It was a curiously compassionate look. "Ah, good morning, sir." "Good morning," the old man replied. Chester felt like scrambling out of bed to put his clothes on, but thought it would be undignified. He decided to go with the flow. "My children told me that you were awake. Bring your soap and towel and I will show you where to bathe. And after that, one of my wives will give you some chop." He eased out of the room as quietly as he entered. Chester pulled a large towel from his valise and draped it around his ample waist, picked up his shaving kit bag and strolled out of his hut feeling ill at ease with his nakedness. Every day and every evening began with a bath in Ghana. Only the most decultured refused to bathe if water was available. The sparkling sunshine blinded him for a minute. He blinked and opened his eyes on what seemed to be a village of people doing things. Children ran about doing childish things. Women were washing, cooking, cleaning. "Come with me," Grandfather Odei spoke softly to him. Chester nodded to the adults and smiled at the children, following the old man down a narrow passageway behind the huts in the compound. This is interesting. Formerly, he only spoke to me through his son. Now he speaks to me freely. Wonder what that's about. Oh well. The bath was a simple enclosure of bricks about 5 feet high. There were 2 buckets of water waiting for him, one to wash and one to rinse. The old man gestured him into the enclosure and walked away. After his bath, Chester joined the old man and his son on the mud veranda. A shy young woman served him a bowl of black-eyed peas with slivers of goat meat in it. He ate with his right hand. Proper. It's good. "We call this red bread," the son told him, and settled his back against their home and sipped a cup of tea. The old man sat with his eyes half lidded, watching the activity in the compound. Occasionally he would call out to someone or give an order. Chester took note of his actions. This man could be 70 or 90. but he gives the impression of being much younger, and he knows so much. That's obvious, just looking in his eyes. The pace of life was slow, but everyone was busy. After his breakfast, Chester sat, wondering what was next. The old man's son read his mind. Mr. Simmons, my father is going to study. I'm going to teach a class of naughty children. Please feel free to do as you please. Moments later, they both left him sitting alone on the veranda. He became aware that attention was being focused on him. The little children stared at him with undisguised curiosity, the way children do all over the world. The women glanced at him, discussed the khaki shorts, t-shirt, and sandals he was wearing. He was certain of that. Grandfather Odei has 6 wives. I wonder which of these women are his wives. He surreptitiously studied the motions and activities of the 14 mature women and 6 young girls who were sewing, bringing water, sweeping, pounding fufu, caring for those younger than themselves. There were no young men or teenage boys around. He puzzled over that for a minute. They're all farming, probably. There's a world beyond here. After 5 indecisive minutes, he decided to take a walk beyond the confines of the compound. Curious eyes followed his exit from the compound. 100 yards from the compound, and he was in deep forest. The sudden change from being surrounded by people by being surrounded by bushes and trees overwhelmed him for a moment. He stood in place looking around and listening. The sounds of the people in the compound were distinct and clear, but the silence of the forest made him feel tiny, vulnerable. He didn't feel threatened by the forest, simply awed. On the way back to his home, he passed a clearing, and from the clearing he looked up at the hillside restaurant of tomorrow's. It seemed to be a mirage. Mr. Simmons, please come with me. It is time. Chester fumbled for his khaki shorts and clean t-shirt. It is time. He followed Grandfather Odei's oldest son. He had discovered the old man had 12 sons and 5 daughters and many grandchildren to the old man's hut. It was time for Chester to receive his first preparation for his spiritual quest in the bush. Entering the hut, he was surprised to see 2 other men. They were elders. He went to each one and saluted them by kneeling on his right knee and shaking their right hands the way he had been instructed to do. And then the rituals began. Libation was made to the spirits, prayers were offered, and during the course of events, Chester was given a calabash of medicine to drink. They called him to go outside and vomit in a hole that had been dug for that purpose. He felt scared. What if I'm not found to be fit for this? What if? The hesitancy he felt, the doubts, were overcome during a night of purging. It was almost as though the men who were assembled acted as prosecutors, interrogators. They asked questions that had so many nuances that Grandfather Odei's son, the translator, had problems translating. My son, why have the spirits chosen you? Chester answered all of the questions as honestly as he could, drank everything that was given to him to drink, even though he had vomited 6 times. Round about dawn, it came to a spirited beginning. Do you know what you are doing here? One of the elders asked him in a strident tone. Grandfather Odei silenced his answer with a casual wave of his right hand and cast a baleful look at the elder who had asked the question. Chester staggered to his hut with as much dignity as he could maintain. How long would the preparation go on? He spent most of the day sleeping, dreaming strange dreams that bordered on nightmares. And once again, Mr. Simmons, please come with me. It is time. He felt small, angry, and fearful. He was also beginning to resent the power and control they had over him. Who in the hell are these people anyway? Just a bunch of ignorant-ass old men in a nowhere village somewhere in the middle of nothing. Chester slowly erased the negative thoughts forming in his subconscious after a few moments of more serious thinking. What am I talking about? These old men are probably the wisest people I will ever know. They're forcing me to go inside myself to take a hard look at what I think I am.
Mm.
Suddenly, in this place, his credentials didn't mean very much. He wasn't Chester L. Simmons, world-famous author, big shot. He was a small boy begging for a place at the grown-ups table.
Mm.
Mr. Simmons, tomorrow night we will go to the bush. The announcement was like a slap across his face. He wasn't ready for it. And why should it have to be at night? Tomorrow night?
Yeah.
Tomorrow night? Grandfather Odei nodded and lit his pipe, blocking the possibility of answering the dozens of questions that Chester wanted to ask him. What exactly am I supposed to do in the bush? Who's going with me? How will I eat? Water? Clean clothes? Where in the bush? The bush where? He felt an anxiety attack coming on. He headed it off by thinking his own personal mantra. Don't panic. Don't panic. Don't panic. I'll be ready when the time comes, he said bravely. The old man flashed him a large, toothless smile. There was nothing else to do, nothing else to be said. Chester bowed himself out of the hut. The compound was lit by sputtering kerosene lamps that flickered through murky windows. A few people walked around doing ghostly errands. Chester strolled beyond the perimeter of the compound and stared up at the sky that bristled with bright stars. I should go and pack my stuff right now and get the hell out of here. How did I get into this mess anyway? Oh, God. He replayed the mental tape that brought him to Africa, to Ghana, to this small compound on the outskirts of the town called Latte. Well, you really got yourself up Schitt's Creek without a paddle this time.
Mm-hmm.
What in the world made me stick my neck out this far anyway? He strolled slowly on the path leading away from the compound to the bush, his thoughts alternating between sheer panic and sober reason. I'm doing what I'm doing to help future generations escape the possibility of being cursed. In the darkness, barely able to see more than a few yards around himself, he stared up at the star-ridden sky. A curse? A curse? Was such a thing possible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Affirmative. Affirmative.
Mm-hmm.
The time he had spent with the Quartey descendants and the evidence they offered via computerized calculations had not fully convinced him that they were cursed. He had been led into his role as an adventurous spirit rather than a true believer. But now, here in Grandfather Odei's compound, he had become a believer. Maybe it has something to do with how naturally people here think of curses, of individuals being able to change the lives of others and how the lives of others are changed by individuals. A mysterious rustling of leaves to his left grabbed his attention. Who is that? Who is it? The rustling leaves settled back into place, leaving him in silence and darkness. Damn, it's spooky as hell out here. He wandered back up the path and came to an unfamiliar fork in the path.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember this. Arbitrarily, he decided to go left, and after a minute of cautious walking, discovered that he was lost. Momentary panic drove his heart rate up, and suddenly he felt thirsty. He thought about remaining in place till morning so that he would be able to see, and immediately vetoed the thought, there must be snakes out here and many other kinds of animals. Chester shuffled back to the fork of the path, glancing over his shoulder into the darkness. He felt a tightness in his chest begin to loosen as he continued on the right path and could hear the evening sounds of the compound. 6 a.m. Chester stared up at the thatched ceiling. There's got to be snakes up there.
Keep looking at them, they'll come down. Leave them alone.
A couple of them, anyway.
Yeah.
There got to be some snakes up there.
No.
He sat up slowly, keeping a peripheral eye cocked on the ceiling as he dressed in his usual compound outfit, t-shirts, khaki shorts, and sandals. One of the women met him as he exited his hut. "Mr. Simmons, no bath this morning?" "Not this morning, I'll do it later." "A bath before going to bed and a bath in the morning? What sense does that make? What's going to make me dry dirty in the middle of the night?" He wandered over to Grandfather Odei's hut to sit on the veranda, knowing that someone would immediately bring him food and water. As expected, a few moments after he sat down, the same woman who had served him before came to him with bread, margarine, and a pot of tea. "And what's your name, please?" The woman looked startled and shyly covered her face with her right hand. "I'm called Grace," she said softly between her fingers. "Nice to meet you, Grace, and thanks for the chop." "You're welcome." He made a surreptitious study of the woman as she swayed away from him. Gorgeous women, all of them, so feminine. He had no idea which ones were the wives of Grandfather Odei or of his sons or any of the other men he had met over the past few days. None of the girls or women had been introduced to him. He had made an accurate guess about the absence of men in the compound on his first day there. Most of them worked their farms at a distance from the compound, and the rest had moved into Latte. Some had even immigrated to the big cities, Kumasi and Accra.
Wow.
The young men, they are fools. They go to the towns and leave their heritage, the land and their culture behind them. And then, when they become old men like me, they want to return to their roots. But there's nothing there for them. They have not made an investment in their roots. Grandfather Odei came from around the corner of his hut and settled down quietly near Chester. "You all enjoy your chop?" "Oh, yes, sir, yes, thank you." No other words seemed necessary. The old man always made Chester feel like a raw recruit, a greenhorn, a tenderfoot. It had something to do with his serenity, his code. He finished eating and sat there sipping his tea. Watching compound life unfold. As the sun climbed higher, the women retreated to the shadiest places to do their work, leaving the forever energetic children to play in the sun. One little boy ran away from a too rough, impromptu soccer game, played with a rolled up bunch of rags, crying for some reason, straight into Grandfather Odei's lap. The old man cooled and hugged him for a moment and pushed him back into the fray. He exchanged eye signals with Chester as though to say, "You see how it is." Chester replied with an answering smile, "Yes, I see how it is." That was it. He was becoming accustomed to the quiet shorthand. There was no need to talk about it if an exchange of looks, expressions could say everything. A few minutes later, the old man stood up in front of him, a small person who had suddenly become a giant. "This evening, I will give you instructions of what to do, and my eldest son will take you to the bush." That was it. The old man entered his hut, leaving Chester on the veranda, breathing heavily. The bush?
The bush.
What the hell am I supposed to do there?
The bush, the bush, the bush.
How will I survive? I don't know anybody. I don't know nobody in the bush. The last thought caught him by surprise and made him smile. "I know people in Chicago, LA, New York, Denver, Rome, Amsterdam, Paris, Berlin, Accra, Lagos, Cairo, Joburg, Athens, and a whole bunch of other places, but I don't know anybody in the bush."
Now you will.
I guess I'll soon find out. I'll get to know somebody.
Opportunity.
But you get the
Opportunity knocks.
Chester sprawled on his mud platform bed, lying dobo, as he heard someone call it. He reached to the floor to soak his face towel in a basin of tepid water and draped it across his forehead. The mid-afternoon heat felt like a blast furnace. Well, why wouldn't it? We're only a few hundred miles from the equator. He nodded off and on, feeling too sluggish to do anything. Rivulets of sweat rolled from the wrinkles in his neck, and there was a velvet coating of moisture on his face and chest. Hot. In his daydream, he was walking upstream beside a gurgling river of clean, cool, clear, aqua blue water. From time to time, he paused, knelt beside the river, and sucked in the river. The taste was almost intoxicating. He opened his eyes slowly, hoping to see the water flowing in front of him. Instead, he looked at a huge spider descending to his chest and screamed. The doorway was suddenly filled with heads of women and children looking anxiously at him. He felt embarrassed to be the object of their attention. "Oh, I just had a bad dream, a nightmare. It made me scream. Sorry." The huge spider had disappeared. Grandfather Odei's son appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Sims, you all okay?" Yeah, I'm okay. I just had a bad dream." That's all. Odei Jr. gave a rapid-fire translation of what had happened to the people in the doorway and shooed them away. They stood looking at each other for a few beats before the son left the doorway. Chester sat on the side of his platform looking paranoid and miserable. He'd never been an outsy-dorsy type. For him, a trip to the wilderness in the bush meant an overnight stay in a well-furnished cabin with all the latest technology and a well-stocked liquor cabinet. He pulled a notebook from his valise and sat wondering what to write. No books here, nothing to lean on.
I'm getting ready to go to the bush.
Going to the bush. I see you, crawling through the bush.
Yep, crawling to the bush.
How many days and nights have I been in this place? The sweat from his hand smeared the page he was trying to write on. Too hot to write. He dropped the notebook and ballpoint on the floor and sprawled back on the platform. Well, at least I know I have spiders living up there. Where are the snakes?
Spiders in.
He nodded off again. The shadow created by the sun seeping below his window ledge stirred him away from his sleep. Thank God it's evening, finally. Grandfather Odei, is it always this hot? He'd asked the day before. It had always been hot in the rainy season, but not this hot. I think the machines that they are shooting into the air make us hotter. Yeah, that figured. The rainy season, I have to remember that. Unexpectedly, Grace came to his door with a bowl of kinky and fish at twilight. "I'll go," she called out. "Come in," he answered. She entered shyly, skipping rabbit-like to leave the food on the chair by his bedside and skipped out. "Thank you, Grace," he called out to her. She exited, giggling. Funny lady, so shy. He washed his right hand and dug into the kinky, pinching parts of it off to sop up the hot stew sauce. This is good. He was halfway finished with the tilapia, kinky, and stew before the realization struck him. I wonder why I wasn't invited to eat with everybody else, with the other man. The question in his mind caused him to pause and sniff the contents of his bowl. Come on out, Chester. You started to get paranoid. If these people had wanted to slip something in on you, they could have done it any time.
How long?
Yet, and still, he felt vaguely uneasy. They only took a few more mouthfuls of food before feeling full. Now what? He washed his hands and lay back on his platform. Now what? He felt the urge to get up and walk up, but decided not to. Maybe they'll come for me while I'm gone. It was night once again, and his anxiety grew as he waited. Grandfather Odei said, "Tonight." I'm sure he did. A few hours in the bush, I can deal with that. Just as he was getting ready to go across the compound to Grandfather Odei's hut and ask what was happening, the son came for him. "Mr. Simmons, please come with me. It is time." Chester was pleased to see that only Grandfather Odei was in the hut. Good, I can cope with him. The Grandfather Odei gestured for him to come and sit directly in front of him. They sat on the ground looking like two children about to play a game of jacks. Chester stared into the old man's opaque eyes and was chilled by what he couldn't see, couldn't understand. You have come to ask me to do what may be impossible. You have come to me from far across the ocean to ask me to remove the curse that I placed on the Quartey clan because they took my grandson away. Oh my God. When I made this curse, it was in the heat of anger. My blood was boiling because of what the trader Quartey had done. And never have I regretted my actions. The chill that Chester felt came from the realization that the voice coming from Grandfather Odei, the Bokor, was of another. The voice crackled and rasped like an old paper being crushed and burned. You have come to ask me to do what may be impossible. I must find out who you are before I can take your request seriously. Despite the fact they were seated on the ground, Chester felt a weakness in his knees. The old man's head slumped on his chest for a long minute, and when he raised it, Chester was stunned to see a completely different, lively look on his face and his eyes. And when he spoke, it was in his normal, deep baritone. My son, these are the instructions I have been given by the spirits to give you the right to properly represent your case before them, before me as an Okyeame. I will accept the decision they make for me. You will be taken to the bush this evening. A place has been built for you. It is near good water. There will be no food for you to eat for 7 days. Chester felt discourteous by interrupting, but he had to be clear about this. You mean I will have to fast for 7 days? Yes, you will fast for 7 days. The old man paused as though waiting for a follow-up question. Chester's shoulders slumped with resignation. During the course of your time without food, you must pray to your ancestors. Ask them to give you information. Ask them to tell you how to live the best life. Ask them to speak to Grandfather Bookman to lay the curse aside. After a week, my son will bring you some chop, and he will also bring you other instructions. Go now and exercise patience.
Okay.
Click. From the corner of his eye, Chester saw the Bokor's son enter the hut just before the old man bound his eyes with a black strip of cloth. This will help you to look inward on your journey. Chester felt desperately claustrophobic for a split second, as though he had been pushed into a tight black cave. The son grasped his hand and arm and led him outside. The last words he heard were the sounds of the old cracked, raspy voice he had heard earlier. Goodbye, Chester Simmons. Goodbye. And then inside the darkness, he was led away to the bush. They walked for many miles. Chester felt, stumbling on the verge of panic every step of the way. Is it much further? No, not much more. The distance we have to go is small. Grandfather Odei's son placed Chester's hands on his shoulders and walked naturally. After a few yards, Chester had fallen in step with him. He felt that he was doing a dance that had so many steps he couldn't memorize them. Sometimes they danced straight ahead and then to the side, and at times he felt they were dancing backwards. He wanted to talk, but he was afraid he would lose his way in the darkness. How can I lose my way, not knowing where I'm going anyway? Mm-hmm. Things brushed against his body, feeling like jagged fingers. Spiderwebs grabbed his face. He was terrified and wanted to stop walking, but he was more terrified of the idea of being in one place. Periodically they paused and he was given water. How far to where we going? It's not too far, Mr. Simmons, not far at all. Chester was emotionally ricocheted from despair to anger to fear to states of mind he couldn't identify. Maybe I've lost my mind. Mm-hmm. maybe I lost my mind. It never occurred to him to lift the blindfold from his eyes. Strange sounds assaulted his ears, dogs fighting and growling to his left, the chatter of birds to his right, the roar of a lion behind him. His t-shirt and shorts were completely soaked from perspiration, and the dew of the leaves had lapped at his body. We are here, Mr. Simmons. Chester reached up to take the blindfold from his eyes, but he was prevented from doing it by his guide. No, 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 not yet, Mr. Simmons, not yet. Listen. Chester heard the musical sound of water flushing, a river or a stream somewhere near. He stood in place with his hands hanging limply at his side, smiling at the gorgeous sounds. A few beats later, he heard Grandfather Odei's son's voice. It seemed to be coming from overhead. I will pray that it goes well with you, Mr. Simmons. I will return in 7 days to bring you chop. Now you may take off your blindfold. That's what he said. Chester was deliberately slow about removing the blindfold. He didn't want to impress Grandfather Odei's son with his courage. He did want to impress Grandfather Odei's son with his courage. The darkness without the blindfold was almost as inky as the darkness that surrounded his walk into the bush. The Bokor's son was no longer with him. He felt around himself in the darkness, waving his hands like a radar screen. No one here. He stared up at the billions of pinpoints of light and began to cry. Silent tears had dribbled down his cheeks and into the corners of his mouth. Why me? After all the stuff I've done, after all the places I've been, why should I have to wind up in the middle of a forest somewhere in Ghana? I hope I'm still in Ghana. The undercurrent hum of billions of night creatures formed layers of sound that were punctuated by sudden howls, screeches, screams. Chester stood in place, afraid to look behind him, terrified he was going to be torn to bits any minute. The beautiful gurgling of water kept him from screaming, from venting the madness he felt. He didn't know what to do. He slowly sank to the ground and stared as intently as possible into the darkness at his right and to his left and to his front. He was still afraid to look behind him. Sitting there with a fresh flow of silent tears on his cheeks, he could barely make out the mound-shaped hut. It was a hut made out of banana leaves. He groped until he came to an entrance. He peered into the opening, afraid to go in. No telling what's inside. He felt around on the ground for a stick, a rock, something he could use for a weapon. A lot of sense that would make. Whatever it is has definitely got me outnumbered. Rational thoughts were still no motivation for stooping into the opening. Yeah! He screamed to the entrance, not knowing what to do if anything ran or crawled or jumped out. Nothing. After a few hesitant moments, he stepped inside the hut. It was like being blindfolded again, except for the round hole in the roof of the hut where the stars glistened through. He fell to the ground and stared up at the round moon filled with stars before falling into an exhausted sleep. I'm going to pause here for a moment to take some orientations. Chester Simmons is now in a place he's never been before. Social creature that's surrounded almost all his life. Even as a writer, he makes me think of what they used to say about James Baldwin.
Oh?
Who might drink a half a fifth of scotch and go over in the corner and start writing while people were still having a party all around him. So he was known to do things like that.
Interesting.
Chester's alone moments have occurred when he was working on something, but
As most writers, yeah.
But like most, a lot of creative people, let's put it that way. The minute they finish doing their creative thing, they want to go out and socialize. And that's why you have the bohemian cafes and the painters who go to the Moulin Rouge and all the rest of the stuff.
Good point. Good point.
So this is what is very something with him, because now we're on chapter 18.
Oh, okay. Wow. Oh,
Chapter 18.
gotcha.
The sun's rays streaming into the doorway awakened him. Silence. A distant horn. What kind of animal would make a sound like that? He stared around him at the inside of the banana leaf thatched hut. Nothing but a hut of leaves laced onto bent sticks on the bare ground. He stooped through the door and out into the forest, holding back his urge to pee. Gotta see what's out here. He looked up and around him at a cathedral of trees, fluffy underbush, huge ferns, mushroom-shaped bushes, the sun sprinkling rays on his shelter in the clearing, burning hot. He slipped to the side of the clearing to pee against a tree in the shade. The water seemed closer as he moved to the side. A river. Something to drink. He fumbled through the underbrush toward the sound of water. A miniature river. A rivulet flushed through the forest floor. Bet if I followed this, I'd wind up in somebody's village. Or in the middle of nowhere. He sucked up water, splashed it on his face, and finally walked into the stream to wash his clothes. Naked, he hung his clothes on top of his hut and retreated, once again to the shade at the edge of the clearing. The rustling of leaves behind him almost made him run, but he gripped the ground with his palms and looked fearfully out of the corner of his left eye instead. A huge rodent scurried out into the clearing, sniffing and scratching the ground. Oh my God, a giant rat! A giant rat! He knew they were called bushmeat in Ghana and sometimes cooked in spicy stews, but that didn't prevent him from feeling scared to death. Do they run in packs? Is it coming back? He strode back to the river feeling vaguely hungry. 7 days without eating anything? 7 days without chewing? He found a flat rock beside the stream and sat with his feet plunged into the mud at the bottom. The forest made sounds he couldn't identify. The thought made him paranoid. What the hell is out there? Over there? He double-checked his immediate surroundings from the ground to the trees looking for snakes.
Like this.
Last thing I need is to have some monster coil itself around me in the middle of the day. In the dark, evidently he hasn't been raised on Wild Wild World of Animals.
No, not at all.
Nature
No.
Today. And
Not at all.
in the dark, gradually, as though a light bulb had been dimmed to darkness, Chester put on his sun-dried t-shirt, underwear, and shorts and crawled into his hut. A few minutes prior to going to bed for the night, he began to recall the reason for him being in the bush. During the course of your time without food, you must pray to your ancestors. Ask them to give you information. Ask them to tell you how to live the best life. Ask them to speak to Grandfather Odei to lay the curse aside. He lay on the bare ground with his hands placed behind his head, staring at the stars and thinking, I could die here, and no one would ever know about it. This hut, this clearing, would be overgrown in a month. He closed his eyes and imagined the vegetation around him slowly reclaiming the clearing and the hut in the center. It was already happening. In the space of time he had been there, growing things were pushing through the earth around his hut. There was nothing he could do but observe. He couldn't prevent anything from happening. The rain came in the middle of the night as he curled himself into a fetal knot, trying to ward off the tropical chilliness. It was a thunderous rain that pounded the leaves of his hut like giant fists and poured through the round hole in the roof. He was forced to go outside and drape a leaf over the hole. The raindrops were pellets, and the noise of the thunder made him feel like the most helpless animal on earth. The rain continued throughout the day, a merciless blithers of water. He stood outside his hut at midday with his mouth wide open, swallowing rainwater. Back inside his hut, he sat on the rain-soaked earth, feeling dejected, miserable. When did I eat last? What did I eat? He was beginning to feel very hungry. He peeked out of the hut into the driving rain. There must be something out there to eat. Finally, midway between a sound sleep and a daydream, he heard the burping sound of frogs. The rain had stopped. Just as he stooped to exit his hut to stand out under the full glare of a full moon, he was soaking wet and hungry. The forest around him seemed to be steaming, giving birth to foggy shapes. Now I know what they mean by primitive. This could be the beginning. He strolled around the perimeters of his hut, feeling a little more confidence than he'd felt earlier, in the middle of nowhere. Slowly, as though a couple of giant hands were pushing him down to the ground, he knelt on the wet, spongy forest floor, folded his arms across his chest and began to pray. Mom, Dad, Uncle John, Aunt Bessie, Aunt Mary, Aunt Mammy, Uncle Eugene, Aunt Luella, Uncle Percy, Grandma Day, Grandfather Day. Began a soft, slow flow of 20 names of deceased ancestors that passed through his lips before he began to ask them to give him some information. I need some information. I need your help. Please tell me what to do. Mosquitoes began to torment him as he prayed, but he couldn't stop until he said everything he had to say. Later, he stood swatting mosquitoes but felt better about the situation he was in. On one level, he hadn't received any instant relief, but strangely, he felt enlightened, more at ease. The mosquitoes left his body one by one, and finally he was simply left in peace. He felt crazy. I can't remember what day it is, what time it is. How long have I been out here in the bush? His stomach rumbled with hunger pains, but there was nothing to do about it. I made a commitment to go with this thing. I'm going to have to stick with it. There's too much at stake to punch out. Nighttime, nothing to do. Only moonshine and starlights. Just as squatted in place, there was nowhere to go, nothing to do. He began to write stories in his mind. For an hour, he thought of variations of old European fairy tales, Ocean and the Three Panthers. The little Ashanti sister who lived in a shoe and had so many babies she didn't know what to do. The big bad elephant, the sarcastic fox. He didn't feel sleepy, but there was nothing else to do. So he entered his hut and sprawled on the wet floor. Tomorrow, I'm going to bring some dry leaves in here. Try to do something with this place. It was dawn. He could tell from the position of the sun and the sounds of animals. Monkeys? You were greeted each day with a chorus of hooting and barking sounds. He came out of his hut and immediately dropped to his knees to pray. He called out all of the names he had prayed to previously and added the names of all the deities he could remember. Please, Obatala, Allah, Buddha, Ogun, Eshu, Jesus, Moses, God, Oshun, help me. Please give me the ways and means to live a better life. The irony of being alone in a great forest with only a t-shirt, underwear, shorts, and sandals, living in a banana hut, asking for guidance to a better life struck his funny bone. He began to laugh uncontrollably. He stopped him.
If your friends could see you now.
He stopped abruptly to peer around into the forest surrounding him. Better keep my cool here. Somebody will think I've lost my marbles.
Who?
Somebody else.
The owl?
He began to work to pull large banana leaves from nearby trees to reinforce the leaves on his hut frame and to sleep on and cover himself at night. He had completed his work in about half an hour, drenched in preparation. Damn, it's humid in here. Time for a bath. Just to walk quickly to the rivulet that was swollen by the rains to a broader stream. He found the flat rock he'd set on during his first visit, placed it in the shallows at the shore, removed his clothes and sat on it, enjoyed the cool water rushing over his body. There was nothing else to do, nothing else to occupy his mind. So he prayed again, first silently, then aloud. The water gurgled and gushed around him, making him feel a part of the flow. The vegetation on each side of the stream was familiar to him now, no longer as threatening, but he still kept a sharp lookout for snakes. Wild animals, piranhas, and ghostly figures creeping up on him. He couldn't tell how long he sat in the stream. He couldn't tell what time it was. It must be pretty close to high noon with the sun straight up over me like it is. He was surprised to see the lengthening shadows that indicated that evening wasn't far away. Wow, you mean to tell me I've sat in this stream all day? He hung his wet clothes, which were beginning to frazzle a bit, on the walls of the hut to dry. He squatted naked to peer at the golden orb that was the sun slowly falling from the sky. I gotta get me something to sit on. Inside the hut, he arranged the broad leaves under the hole in the roof to give him a clear view. Sprawling out on the leaves, he had forgotten he was naked. It seemed to be the most natural state for him to be in. He was awakened from a light sleep by the sounds of animals shuffling around outside of the hut. Bears, lions, hyenas. The gruesome look of the hyena played on his mind. The receptive environmentalist who had watched 1,000 animals in the wild shows. Well, I just said he hadn't, but I guess he had. Indecision paralyzed him. Should I make sounds, noise to try to scare them away? But if I do, they might come in and get me. He was suddenly aware he was a naked man in the middle of a forest. 2 pairs of blazing yellow eyes appeared at the entrance to his hut. Chester screamed with fear and the eyes disappeared. He remained in place, trembling. Oh my God! I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. And go where? He arranged 2 of the banana leaves in front of the hut opening and retreated to the farthest corner of the hut. What do I do if they decide to break in here? He resolved to find a stick he could use as a weapon first thing in the morning. He slept in bits and pieces, startled to full wakefulness by every sound that seemed too close to his hut. And then toward the dawn it rained. Another wet tropical blizzard. He sat in the doorway of his hut thinking about himself. Damn, I haven't brushed my teeth or combed my hair in days. I must look like hell. He suddenly remembered that he'd left his clothes hanging on the outside of the hut. A lot of good they do me now. They're wet again. The rain ended abruptly a few hours later, and the sun suddenly blasted through as though it had been waiting for Q in the wings. Chester walked around his hut looking for his t-shirt, underwear, and khaki shorts. He found them a few yards away, torn with jagged holes. He held the items up in front of his eyes, trying to imagine what kind of animals had bitten his clothes to pieces. He made a slow pan of the forest around him. Whoever did this is still around here. He threw the t-shirt, rendered underwear, and mauled khaki shorts into his hut and cautiously entered the forest that led to the stream. Seems to me I saw a nice stick laying around here somewhere. The stream was slightly wider, cleaner, inviting. He sat in his usual place to bathe, being careful to only remain for a brief time. There must be fish in here. I bet if I dam this damn thing up, I could catch me some fish. Despite the fact he knew it would go against the rules that had been laid out for him, the thought made him feel good. And after drinking as much fresh water as he could stand, he no longer felt hunger pains. His stomach stopped rumbling. He found his stick just the right size. He swung it in a tight arc, imaging himself doing a kung fu sword fight. This ought to do it. A few yards away upstream, he found a length of rotted tree trunk. He beat on the log to scare snakes away, scorpions, whatever else might be inside the tree trunk. Dragging the log back to his hut took a long time. But when it was in place, he stood to one side of the clearing and then to the other side, admiring the way the log looked in front of the hut from different angles. Home beautiful, right?
Yes, indeed. Creative.
Spontaneously, he plunged back into the forest, leaving his stick leaning against his log stool to bring back some rocks that bordered the stream. Ant-like, he went back and forth to bring rocks to the clearing. He placed a few of the smaller ones inside the hut to be used as defensive missiles, and arranged the others around the perimeters of his hut. Once again, he stood at an entrance to admire the look of his home. Guess they call this early primitive in the House Beautiful magazine.
Yes, indeed. He's proud of himself.
House Beautiful.
House beautiful.
He went for more rocks to create a pathway to the door of his hut.
Hut beautiful. Get some flowers and
A few daisies here and there, he's, you know.
He's gone mad.
Gotta make it look good.
His ancestors are laughing.
They're laughing. He had just finished his work when the first huge droplet splashed on his body. It was raining again. He stepped over the log at the entrance to the hut and sat there looking at the downpour that was so thick he couldn't see the trees 10 yards away. What's this saying the Armenians have when it rains? God is pissing through a sieve. Well, evidently, they're talking about a different God. This God is not pissing through anything. It's just straight out pissing. He stared into the rain, mystified and a bit frightened by the intensity of it. How could it rain this hard for so long? A sudden memory of another rain many years ago flashed through his subconsciousness. Huge, gorgeous drops of Middle Western rain. They had been caught in the middle of the field, gorging themselves on fat, juicy ears of Middle Western corn, slathered with country butter, potato salad, barbecued pork ribs, ages before anybody thought of healthy eating. Coleslaw, string beans, fresh baked cornbread, a liter of burgundy, homemade ice cream. Then the rain came. Leave it, we can't carry everything. Come on, bring the wine. They had run at least 50 yards through the rain to a shed-like building with a porch, laughing at the absurdity of life. The rain hadn't spoiled anything. It was simply made different. They sat under the protective shield of the porch, taking swigs of wine from the bottle, telling jokes, enjoying each other's company. Look at our picnic. It's getting washed away. Don't look at it that way. Maybe the gods are eating it. Jess, do you believe in more than one God? Yes, I do. She wasn't very tall, but when she stood to strip the wet clothes from her dancer's body, she seemed taller. Which God did this come under? He studied her form, the dark brown skin, the muscles in her legs, her stomach, her full breath. He took one careful, nervous look around. They were miles from anybody. I think I'm the God for that, and it's going to come under me. Out there, on the porch in the middle of a Middle Western field, they make love for an hour. Chester extended what could have been a brief intercourse by periodically forcing himself to pull out, just when he felt the irresistible urge to have his orgasm. He pulled out and stepped backwards into the rain, admiring the woman who lay on the bare wood of a porch moaning a little litany. Please, baby, please come with me. A spectacular clap of thunder and jagged bolts of lightning accompanied their mutual orgasm. Chester stared down at his erect penis. What a strange thing. It even has a memory.
Funny.
The erection twitched and throbbed for a minute and slowly became limp again, leaving a milky droplet of semen at the tiny lips at the end of his penis. He delicately swabbed the droplet away with his index finger and licked it. He couldn't identify the taste. Wonder what the difference is between the taste of a woman's juices and a man's juice. He focused on the women he had known with whom he had shared oral lust or love, but never oral sex. That sounds like a dental term. He couldn't bring up the memory of any particular taste except that a trio who had such a cheesy odor down there, he never had been able to do anything else with them. And the sisters who believed that spraying perfume between their legs was going to enhance their sexual giblets. Wonder how they would feel if someone asked them to suck alcohol. Getting kind of racy here.
Yes, forgot that part. All right.
The rain stopped at the nightfall, leaving him to imagine how many animals were prowling around looking for a post-rain dinner. He placed banana leaves in front of his hut entrance, arranged leaves to sleep on and under, and felt the safety of his club stick and his defensive missiles nearby. As usual, he stared up through the hole in the roof at the stars. They seemed different now. I could make out faces, patterns. Stars have to be the most beautiful things in the world. No, the most beautiful things in the universe. And thank God we can't kill them. We can kill everything down here, the air, the water, the animals, plant life, ourselves, but we can't kill the stars. The thought made him smile, and when he heard the distant roar of an unfamiliar animal, he didn't flinch with fear. Life is so mysterious.
Woo! So that was 17 and 18.
17 and 18.
Wow. So we're going to leave Chester in the forest.
Chester in the forest.
All right.
And there's a little bit more to come.
And there's a little bit more to come.
Yes.
Woo! That's a book, Odie Hawkins.
Yeah, it kind of got me into it too.
Well, Shackles Across Time, obviously. And it can be purchased at Author House, iUniverse. Oh, not iUniverse. Author House, Amazon.
Come back.
Yes. Just still caught on 17 and 18. Author House again. Amazon. Barnes & Noble. Your local bookstore. Just go in and say, I want Shackles Across Time by Odie Hawkins. And your website is www.odiehawkins.com. You are on the author's page and you did vote.
Oh!
And folks, yes, vote. Okay, folks, if you're going to stand in line, get a Odie Hawkins book and stand in line and read. Okay, it will entertain you while you wait.
You better believe it.
All right then.
Oh wow, I never thought about that.
Well, for those who are looking, if you like the page, please press the like button. And also, if you like these videos, please subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you tomorrow.
This is going on here. I'm telling you.